Hello, hello. It is my biggest honor to present you with the first episode of Re-Educated, your 11th favorite podcast on everything education. It's your newly balded host, Gautham Yegapan, and I hope y'all are having a fantastic day, and I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. Hope you enjoy. So today I had the opportunity to speak with Doug Hummel Price, a research fellow and data scientist at the Edunomics Lab, a center at Georgetown University that explores and models complex financial decisions to inform education policy. Doug and I began our conversation discussing what the role of data is in the decision-making process in regards to education policy.
In education, more so than a lot of realms, I've found that there is a lot of conventional wisdom that is not backed up by data. There are a lot of sort of myths that persist within educators that have since been debunked. One of the biggest examples of that is you may be familiar with the concept of kind of different learning types. Like, I am primarily a auditory learner, or I'm a visual learner, right? And this idea that like you need everything presented to you in that modality to learn it. Well, science has since shown that that's not really a thing. That we all have sort of different preferences about those different types of learning, but we all generally learn from all of those types of learning. We might be better at some than others, but that may differ wildly depending on the domain. You may need to see physics equations on the board, but you might not need to see words when you're learning history or something. I don't know. And so that's just an example of something where data and numerous studies have pretty thoroughly debunked that idea. But if you, I don't know the statistics off my head, but a not insignificant percentage of educators still think that that's a thing. And they kind of construct their lessons based off of that idea.
Seemingly it makes sense.
Well, right. Exactly. And intuitively, it works with our experience. And it makes sense that would be the case. It also helps, and this is part of the thing, is that education is super complex, and there really isn't any one thing or even any small number of things that will collectively fix all of the problems. Yeah. But people don't like to hear that. People want simple answers. People want simple things. Yes. And so when something comes along like that could theoretically, if that were true, you could redesign education and have a massive impact on outcomes and how much more students would be learning.
Yeah.
So like I certainly get all of that instinct. The other issue with education, and this comes up in a couple of other fields as well, probably climate science and that sort of thing. There are such strong political players that do not necessarily have the best interest of students in mind, that teachers in particular, but administrators as well.
As we transitioned into the political realm of education, I was fascinated to hear Doug speak on the role research at think tanks and universities play on the policy-making process. As social science research is often not as conclusive as research in the hard sciences, I was really interested to see what complexities arise due to this.
Because no one can ever know all of the things that they need to know in any number of realms, you eventually have to trust external sources, right? How do I know what I know about bridges?
The vaccine, I think, is a perfect example.
Or the vaccine, right? Yeah, exactly. You know, like I am not remotely qualified to look at, like, I could probably read a study and understand statistically what it's saying, but there's going to be all sorts of domain-specific facts that I'm going to be missing.
I saw this joke about that, actually. He was saying, like, when people say I need to research about the vaccine, like, what exactly does that mean? Like, what, right. Like, you're not going to be in the lab researching, it's like very difficult to even understand the jargon that is used in a lot of that research.
Right.
And I think one of the most difficult things is when research is completely sound, but there's multiple researches that show the opposite conclusions. Then what do you do? And then as a person who's not an expert in that field, you're kind of just like, okay, I see both. Therefore, it just neither of them matter. I feel like that's the easiest conclusion to reach.
Well, that is, and so part of the problem is that to like really do all of that as just like an informed individual, you have to sort of, whether consciously or not, create a very deep set of like networks of trust where it's like, well, like I can't read that study because I'm not qualified for it, but I trust this person
Mm.
who they can't read it either, but they trust this person that can read it, right? And so it's sort of this series of trust,
Yes.
right? Where it's like
And each person has that trust factor for a different field.
yes, yes, exactly. And it's not something that is easily articulated. Like, how do you know? Because most of the interesting cases that we're talking about here are not situations where the science overwhelmingly agrees, right?
Yes,
Or like where
exactly.
the studies overwhelmingly agree, right? Because really the only place that sort of thing happens is like
It's physics,
physics,
maybe.
physical
Yeah.
things. Yeah, physical things that we can run literally the same exact study in
In
a bunch of
math.
different places a bunch of times. You know,
Yeah.
we can put these what do they call the gravitational wave detectors in three different places on the Earth, and
Mm.
when we catch the wave at three different times that triangulates correctly, like we have pretty strong evidence of the thing that we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
When you're dealing with particularly people, the system becomes so complex that that alone makes it really hard. The other side is that there's all sorts of pragmatic issues where like there's tons of ethical problems with any kind of human research. I mean, there's all sorts of questions that we would love to do randomized controlled trials on that we can't. I mean, it's like smoking is a good example of that. We still don't have randomized controlled trials showing that smoking causes cancer, right?
Oh,
Because
I
that
did
would
not
be
know that.
unethical. That would be
Mhm.
unethical.
That would make sense.
Um,
Yeah.
but the non-randomized controlled studies are so overwhelmingly clear that it causes that we know that we can sort of trust that and move on. But it's
Interesting.
difficult to explain to someone like why in that case, like at what point is the evidence overwhelming,
Mm.
right? I mean, at what point, like for
That's a
climate
good
science
question.
right now,
Hmm.
climate is over like the science there is overwhelmingly pointing that humans are the cause and that we need to stop putting carbon into the atmosphere and we need to reduce our emissions and we need to probably figure out how to recapture some of that carbon if we're going to be okay. But the science was also overwhelming a decade ago, 2 decades ago, arguably, in terms of it being clear that humans were causing this, right? And so it's like, well, how do you convince someone that like one of those, like it was okay in 1990 we didn't quite know enough, but now in 2000 we know enough. It's not easy to teach that. It's not even easy to have that conversation just with another person where it's like kind of two intellectual peers talking,
Mm.
let alone trying to figure out how to get that through to children, let alone figuring out how to implement a policy that people will agree to that will teach that to children,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, and I think, even on the global warming issue, all of these issues, what even if someone like agrees with you completely, you then have to also persuade them that this is a problem worth investing time, money, and energy into. And that's
right,
a whole other conversation because you could have someone who believes in global warming, but just thinks that maybe poverty is a larger issue or something else is a larger issue that needs
right,
more time spent on,
right.
and there's just so many levels to it that I actually know a lot of people, most of the people in my life are not interested in politics at all. And I feel like that's exactly why, because you end up in these like deadlock situations so often, you just kind of just get turned off to the entire idea. And you're like, all right, what's the point of even talking about this? We're not moving anywhere.
Right. Well, and a lot of that is a very rational response to one of the fundamental issues of governance is like, well, if not everyone is fully bought into the idea of governance,
Oh,
and
yeah.
some of those people are running government, how do we ever know? Um, how do we ever know what It's very easy to say like, and you can run this for socialism, you can run this for libertarianism, you can run this for like any of these thought systems that like there's theoretically some kind of pure version of it
Hmm.
that just has never been played out in the real world.
Mm.
And it's like you can, when you have this like combination socialist capitalist system, either side of that can always argue, well, we've never done it fully the way I want, and that's why it's not working, right?
Mm. Hmm.
You'll have people talking about, well, the market's never really been truly free because there's always been all this regulation, and so that's why the market hasn't been able to correct itself. And then you'll have people saying, well, these socialist programs didn't work the way we wanted them to because people didn't buy into them, right? And there are instances of either of those camps being correct, probably, but as a whole, neither side can really say we like they it's sort of a data problem. Like we need to collect more data. We need to make sure that we're knowing what we're doing with that data,
Hmm.
and that we're collecting it with a purpose. I think right now we're in a place where a lot of companies have tons of data, but they don't really know what to do with it. Um, the companies that do know what to do with it have done quite well in the
Mm,
past decade or two.
cool.
You look at Google and Facebook and these companies that have taken what was like a relatively minor technological advantage in their field early on, and have just collected so much data that like it's almost impossible for anyone to ever overtake them,
Mm,
because they know so much more about how humans operate
okay.
because of that data.
We continue the conversation discussing the philosophical implications of education. Recently, I was speaking to a leading researcher in children development, William Gormley, and he spoke about how teachers are heavily influenced by their philosophical beliefs regarding education. For example, a teacher who believes civic duty is the ultimate virtue will align their class differently than one who believes critical thinking or maybe even job prospects would. With this in mind, we discuss the difficulty of true rational thought and its negative impacts on education as well as our democracy as a whole.
Economics sort of presupposes that you can do that for every economic decision you make in your life.
Yeah.
And it's something that is just absurd in the context of finite time. Like you can't, there's just not enough time to work enough to make a living and like research every single economic decision that you're making.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Are you talking about like large purchases such as like education or?
everything,
Okay.
everything. I mean, so because part of the point is that the amount of money that you have for those large purchases is somewhat dependent on how much you're spending on those smaller
Yeah.
purchases, right? And so like there's a lot of implying that people should be able to make informed decisions, which in isolation is fine. But when you kind of aggregate it across every single decision, you just can't do your due diligence on
Yes.
every single thing you purchase. And
Yeah, I mean, to quickly interject, I think what you're saying is very true. I mean, for me, I think one of the reasons I actually am very much pushed towards education and in this space is because I strongly believe for a democracy to properly work, everyone needs to be educated to a certain amount, where they're capable of making those thoughts. So it's what you're saying. It's like, one, you need to have the time to make those decisions, and two, your brain needs to be able to know how to think
right,
like that, and I
right.
feel like for democracy to work, everyone has to be at a certain place. Otherwise, everyone's going to be making ill-informed decisions, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's like very evident in. I know a little bit about politics in India, and it seems that you just have so many people that are voting that you can oftentimes just like be like, hey, if you vote for me, we're going to give you a free bag of rice. We're going to give you a fan or a TV. And for most people, like the politics aren't going to, they don't feel like it directly impacts them like that. So, hey, it's a free fan. Why not? And at some point you end up running into that level of like indifference to the entire decision, which kind of
Right.
destroys democracy as a whole.
Well, and particularly with the kind of knowledge set, the founding fathers sort of tacitly, or maybe not so tacitly, um, understood that you can't make good decisions unless you're super well informed. And that's why they only gave the vote to like 1% of the people or whatever.
Yes.
I don't, that number
Yeah.
might be completely wrong, but only to white
There was
landed
there was some
men.
like some and I
You
think
know,
Socrates believed in that as well, like having some level of boundaries on who actually makes the decision as opposed to giving it to the full public. As we moved from education's role in civic responsibility, I was extremely interested to hear Doug's insight on the college admissions process as he worked for the University of Berkeley as a college admissions officer.
so part of what people don't understand is that at those top level schools, the things that we're talking about here, SAT scores, GPA, et cetera, those are prerequisites, but they're not what gets you in. What gets you in is being interesting, right? And that means
Yes.
that you have this volunteer thing that you've done since sixth grade that's turned into this whole big nonprofit that you're part of now, or that that you have really interesting insight about soccer statistics or
Yes.
something, something like that, right? The way that you get into those top schools is not through like if you overly focus on these specifics, the SAT, the GPA, at the expense of like becoming a human being, you end up being not very interesting, and so you're
Exactly.
not going to get into those top schools. Now,
And as a human development thing, I think you're just stunted.
right,
Like
exactly,
I mean, people like to think about childhood, let's say, I mean, best everything works out, no accidents, you make it till you're 80. By the time you leave high school, you've already finished 25% of your life.
Right.
So it's like to miss out on all of that for this, like, as if, once you get into this great school, your whole life is set up. It just doesn't work like that.
Right, right. I mean, it's so. First of all, I believe, and this is an offhand thing, so this could be a little bit wrong, but I believe I've read that, with the exception of the very first job that you get, where you went to undergrad is not a significant factor in your long-term career, because after you get your first job, it's how you do at your job that has a way bigger impact on, you can go to Yale and then do a really bad job at your first job, and like, you're not going to be on that trajectory. Or you could go to Penn State or community college, and if you do well enough at your first job, like, that is going to get you there. But I think there's part of this is sort of what I was saying before, with like, this is all so complex, it's all so interconnected. You can't, people want to study all of these things in isolation, but like, you sort of can't.
As we wrap up a successful episode 1, I just wanted to deeply thank Doug for taking his time out of his busy schedule to speak with me about his experiences. For me, this conversation sheds some light on the complexities and intricacies in the policy process in the space of education. I hope you all enjoyed. Have a great week. And as we say, let's get re-educated.